Let's talk about episode transcripts and show notes. Transcripts. You probably know what a transcript is, and a podcast transcript is really no different, right? It is the text version of whatever you just did in your podcast. And you do have some options if you want a transcript of your show. There's plenty of transcription services out there. Before those existed, I actually hired somebody to do all my transcripts for my shows. The reason I decided to transcribe my shows is because I thought it was going to help me to put the transcription on the website because it had all those great keywords in it. And I thought more people were going to find the content and find our episodes, discover our podcast if it existed on the website. And I had to learn a very costly, literally costly decision because I spent a lot of money hiring people to do transcripts. And that is Google is actually smarter than me, believe it or not. Google got smart and it has these little bots basically that are combing all the sites, and it has certain criteria it looks for. And if it sees that something is a transcript as opposed to, let's say, a blog post with different headers and, it's formatted a little bit differently for easy reading, it is always going to disregard the transcript and focus more on something that actually has more structure to it. So what I'm saying is Google does not appreciate your transcripts on your website. So if that's the reason you're doing transcripts, find something else to do besides transcripts because you're not going to get the outcome that you really want. Having said that, I have been able to use my transcripts to reformat what was originally created in a podcast and put it out there in different mediums in different ways. You're working so hard to create this content, to create this podcast episode. It should exist in other areas because let's face it, not everybody listens to podcasts. People consume content in different ways. And if the goal of your podcast is really to market and promote all these other services that you offer, consider doing a transcript and using that transcript to create other forms of media. So what can you do with it? Well, you could take a portion of the audio, a small portion, and create what's called an audiogram.
On the track, all the other athletes are there, the crowd is there. What is going through your mind?
It was quite surreal, really, because before Rio, I hadn't really run a major championships. Like the highest level I'd managed to run at was a European under-23 championship.
An audiogram is something that a lot of podcasters use. It's just a quick snippet of content. You can usually put like an image behind it. Sometimes it has the words up on the screen, but you can use this and share it on social media so someone gets a real quick snippet of your show and then they can go back later and subscribe or look you up and get more information. So that's one thing you could do. If you had a transcript, you could also pay someone, or you could do it yourself, create a blog post based off your episode. So obviously a much smaller version, but it's not in the typical transcript format. It's formatted for a blog, and perhaps you're just taking a few nuggets from the episode. I've even done blog posts where I have the blog post and then somewhere in the post I link to the entire episode. So I'm getting people to find my podcast based on a blog post I wrote. You can find a quick little snippet of, maybe it's a quote that one of your experts or your guests said in the episode, and create some sort of visual for Instagram, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do. The point is, you have this content. Right now, it's in audio form. So if you get it in text form, you can much easily go through, edit out, figure out what's the best content and create other forms of media from it. So that's one thing you can do. You can create multiple forms of media with really just one piece of content. It really does, though, start with the transcription so you know what was said in your podcast. I also want to talk to you a little bit about show notes. Show notes, not all podcasters really do show notes, and I think there is some confusion over what show notes really is. Show notes is really an elaborate description of what's in your episode. So where we would typically write a couple sentences for a description for your episode, you can really take that up a notch. In fact, I want to go through and show you what show notes can look like. Here's an example of some show notes. So you may have a couple paragraph description of what's going on in your episode, and then you may have some bullet points. So this podcast is for you if you've ever wondered this, and this. Or sometimes what people do is they may actually go through with time code and say, at this point in the episode, we talk about this. At this point in the episode, we talk about that. That is a very detailed version of show notes that can take a lot of time. But if you have a podcast where it's really important that people be able to jump to certain sections of your podcast, you may want to consider something like that. Another thing you can have in show notes are links to resources mentioned in the episode. You can also have links to connect with your expert, as well as ways to connect with your podcast. So that's a very simple version of show notes. They can get very elaborate. Why would you opt to do show notes? Why not just have a paragraph description? Well, I think in most cases a paragraph description would work, but for those people who are really trying to capitalize on the SEO value, it's really not going to help to write all this out and put it in a podcast app. But if your podcast also exists on your website and you're going to take the time to format it properly, you can get some good SEO value out of being more intentional with your description and making your description a little bit longer. That's the main reason. Also, it can be just a good resource for your listeners. If you've got a ton of links, you can always say, hey, this is the link, but if you missed that, or you're driving now, or you're busy now, go over to this page on our website and you'll see a complete list of all the resources we talked about in today's episode. That can be really helpful if your podcast is relying on affiliate marketing to be able to make some money, because you want them to click and do some specific things in order to sign up for those products. So having a more detailed show notes might be a good thing for your show. I will say that I've been podcasting for a very long time. I have never done show notes, and I've always just done a very simple paragraph description, and it's always worked out well for our shows. Keep in mind, most people are consuming content on some sort of mobile device, so they don't have time to scroll through a bunch of show notes. But since you are going to be a podcaster, or perhaps you have already started the podcasting process by watching these videos, then you're going to hear the concept of show notes thrown around a bunch, and I just want to make sure you know the pros and cons of using that, as well as transcriptions.